Good morning, Mr. Arlinghouse. Let's see. Today is Wednesday, March the 3rd. Mr. Arlinghouse, Monday, we spent a lot of time talking about art. Art of this era, particularly the art of Pablo Picasso, which you see here. I'll be honest with you, Mr. Arlinghouse, before I started teaching what we used to call arts and humanities, remember that, Mr. Arlinghouse? Now it's called Half a Survey. I swear I didn't know the first thing about art. And I'm not sitting around here saying that I'm an expert by any stretch of the imagination. However, there is an art component. Pardon me. There is an art component in the AP Euro exam, always, And it's just good to have a grip, a general grip. And one of the artists that they do pick on from time to time is Pablo Picasso and his painting Guernica, which you'll pardon me for a minute. I'm going to pause this. And so, yes, now we're recording again. And so, Mr. Arlinghouse, I was just talking about Pablo Picasso, and the painting that they always hit on is this one. Give me a sec. Is this one? Yes. This is a rather fuzzy representation of Guernica, his most famous work of art. Like I said, I think perhaps, if you feel uncomfortable about talking about art, Guernica, that's the one, because Guernica has not only, of course, artistic significance, but it's about history. It's about the Spanish Civil War. If you like to know something further, just give me a text or something like that, and we'll talk about it further. But yeah, this is a biggie right here. This is Pablo Picasso's most well-known painting, and my students, of course, should be very interested in, because it will feature significantly on the next test. So back to the matter at hand, shall we? Here. Yeah, so let's talk about the intellectual movements of this era. So Roman numeral 15, I'm waiting while you all page that up. In December of 1895, and once again, we're getting into science here. And Mr. Arlinghouse, I know even less about science than I know about art. And now I'm going to sneeze. I'm sorry, audience at home. I should have paused. But, allergies are what they are. Forgive me. Forgive me so much. But so, in December of 1895, William Röntgen published a paper on his discovery of X-rays. Now, what is phenomenal about all this, all these discoveries, including, Einstein's theory of relativity, the uncertainty principle, is that these guys who came up with these things didn't really have any fancy equipment. No electron microscopes or anything of that nature. Much of what they did, they worked out in their head. So let's go through these quickly. Henri Becquerel discovered that uranium emitted a similar form of energy as did X-rays. J.J. Thomson, working in the Cavendish Laboratory of Cambridge, formulated the theory of the electron. part of the atom. 1902, Ernest Rutherford explained the cause of radiation through the disintegration of the atoms of radioactive material. And once again, they did this entirely, you know, they didn't have any pictures, they didn't have any microscopes or any devices like that. Much of it was done with them sitting down, doing research, and making hypotheses, and then going from there. Quite incredible. Yes, theories of quantum energy, relativity, and uncertainty. In 1900, Max Planck pioneered the articulation of the quantum theory of energy. And I will guarantee you that I have students, and I've had students sitting in front of me who could explain that much better than I can. Quantum theory of energy. In 1905, Albert Einstein. One of the cool things about the 20th century, a long time ago in my old job, Mr. Arlinghouse, I used to receive Time magazine, and I used that to teach a course called Current Issues to my students there. It was a good course. I liked the course, and our textbook was Time magazine. Every week we'd get a different one, and we'd go over it every week, and current events history course. I really enjoyed it. But one of the cool things about receiving Time magazine was that the Time education program used to give you, if you accumulated a certain number of points, really cool gifts. Well, one of the cool gifts they gave me was this. It was a VHS tape, which I've since converted to DVD, of the 10 most important people of the 20th century. 2 of them I've mentioned today, Pablo Picasso and our good friend Albert Einstein here. Another person who came up with all these wonderful theories in his head. I mean, incredible. So in 1905, Albert Einstein published his first epoch-making papers, that means, earth-shattering, on relativity, in which he postulated that time and space did not exist separately, but rather as a combined continuum. And, this is where you get into that whole study of, if you travel away at the speed of light for a year, when you return, you'll be younger than you are now when you left. And I don't know. I don't get it. I don't understand it either. It doesn't make sense to me. It did to him. Time and space do not exist separately, but in a combined continuum. In 1927, Werner Heisenberg, Breaking Bad. You know what I'm talking about, Walter White. Set forth his uncertainty principle, according to which the behavior of subatomic particles is a matter of statistical probability rather than of exactly determinable cause and effect. The uncertainty principle, yes. The first time I heard about that was in watching Jurassic Park. Much of the assumptions that physicists had made, thank you, Dr. Ian Malcolm, much of the assumptions that physicists had made only 50 years earlier seemed certain, now were very ambiguous and certain. I mean, for example, let's go back again to our good friend Albert Einstein. The age of reason begins with Isaac Newton's publication of the theory of universal gravitation, which he said, all objects have attraction for every other object. Gravity. Well, Einstein said, not so fast. That gravity operates as a curve, not a straight line, not like Newton said it did. And so, in other words, the point you need to get out of this is that these theories, which seem so rock solid at one point in time, over time changes. Yeah. And that will continue. The mathematical complexity of 20th century physics meant that despite the valiant effort of scientists, science would not become a popular field. Why? It's difficult. But science would affect daily life now more than ever before. Scientists from the late 19th century onward were able to garner more in terms of public support money than ever before. Why? Because governments real fast were finding out that science means money and science means military power. As it says, they did this by relating their research to economic progress, military development, and yes, the health of various nations. The current vaccine. What is incredible about it is that the current vaccine was developed in the span of less than a year. The coronavirus came here March 17th, and give credit to Operation Warp Speed that there are now 3, and hopefully more than that one day, vaccines to go after this virus. Prior to that, creating a vaccine, for example, the polio vaccine, took years. Science has affected modern life more significantly than any other intellectual activity. Good thing. That's a great statement. Science has affected modern life more significantly than any other intellectual activity. Between 18, we all go, oh yeah, sure, of course, well, duh. Well, it wasn't always so, Between 1850 and 1914, literature underwent a radical change known as realism and naturalism. Now I need to get my friends from the English department down here to talk about this. Realist writers rejected the romanticism of the early writers and replaced it with themes of hypocrisy, physical, psychic brutality, and the dullness that underlay bourgeois life and society. Forgive me, what does that mean? Well, and it's why I love romanticism. Because, in a word, in romanticism, heroes are heroic. In realism, heroes are more real. People don't do things to be brave. People do things to serve their best interest. And people we're reminded every day, just turn on the news, that people are ugly. People do things that are just remarkably cruel to each other, often for no reason. So, where are we at? Realist writers, rejected and this should be, forgive me, they brought scientific objectivity and observation to their work, these writers. They confronted readers with the harsh realities around them. Realism rejected the romantic idealization of nature, of the poor, love, and polite society. Once again, if you go back and think about my favorite story, A Christmas Carol. In A Christmas Carol, you have this impoverished family, the Cratchits, but they're so loving and likable and noble and wonderful. And I'm here to tell you, folks, that's not the way it is. Poverty tends to breed other negative side effects that then, in turn, continue the cycle of poverty. Poverty breeds despair. Poverty breeds hopelessness, and because you don't have hope for the future, you then don't do the things that you need to do to improve your lot in life. But in the A Christmas Carol, the Cratchit family, they may as well have been the Waltons. course, Mr. Arlinghouse might remember the Waltons. I'm sure the rest of you don't. John Boy. Good night, John Boy. So, realist novelists portrayed the dark, degraded, and dirty side of life almost for its own sakes. Earlier writers like Charles Dickens, Honore de Balzac had portrayed the cruelty of industrial life of a society based wholly on money. Charles Dickens' later writings, for example, like Bleak House, which is about a bunch of London lawyers, were much more realistic and a lot less uplifting than his earlier writings, such as Tale of Two Cities and Great Expectations and A Christmas Carol. How could I forget? Marianne Evans, whose real name was George Eliot, paid close attention to the details of the scenes and characters she portrayed. These writers had always felt that a better life was possible through Christian values or humane efforts, or for Eliot, through an appreciation of humanity arising from the thought of Auguste Comte, the father of modern socialism. Sorry. The later realists believed that they should portray the side of life without the possibility of a better life necessarily. In other words, to be honest, portray it realistically. Life that for these people may not get any better. Many of them saw society as perpetuating evil. Most critics consider Gustave Flambe's Madame Bovary the first true realistic novel. Émile Zola turned realism into a movement. He published 20 volumes of novels exploring subjects normally untouched by writers. For example, these are just some of them. Do you have to remember them? No. Asimov explored alcoholism. Nana, he explored the life of a prostitute. Zola refused to turn his pen away from the most ugly aspects of life. Zola, was widely criticized, but also widely read, and also took a great part in the defense, as you know, of Albert Dreyfus. And I'm sure we all know who Albert Dreyfus is by now. Did I misspell that? Nope. I think it's only one S. So, Henrik Ibsen carried realism into the drama of domestic life. In his book A Doll's House, for example, a woman leaves her narrow-minded husband, which, once again, in the 19th century, that's just something that wasn't done. Ghost, a middle-class woman, wants to deal with her son suffering from syphilis that he, the son, inherited from her husband. I mean, these are things that wouldn't have been written about half a century ago. Master builder, an aging architect, kills himself while trying to impress a woman who might love him. The Irish writer George Bernard Shaw supported Ibsen and produced plays of his own. Miss Warren's Profession was about prostitution. Arms and the Man was about criminal activity of the lower class. Man and Superman, he heaped scorn on the romantic ideas of love and war. Androcles and the Lion, which is actually the name of an ancient story, an ancient Roman story about a young boy who pulls a thorn out of the paw of a lion, challenged conventional Christianity. By presenting their audiences with unmentionable subjects, they, the writers, sought to remove the veneer of hypocrisy that had previously forbidden such discussion. I mean, these guys were ahead of their time, thinking that the best way to go after these problems that were real was to shine a light on them, to actually talk about them, to present them, which basically is a strategy that still goes on today. Hopefully, that subjects that were once taboo, now is getting a hearing, and by getting a hearing, I mean, take for example the Me Too movement, sexual harassment, incest, those kind of things that would not have been mentioned in polite society or in any society really 50 years ago. I remember reading about a court case in Florida where a woman was sexually assaulted, and perpetrator, the man who did it, was not charged. He did not go to jail because the woman, his case was the woman wore an attractive see-through dress. And, of course, that kind of thing wouldn't fly anymore, but it did in the 1970s. And so, yeah, they hope to destroy social and moral illusions and to compel the public to face reality. Okay, that was naturalism. Now let's talk about modernism. I'm sorry, that was realism. Let's talk about modernism. New movement called modernism touched virtually all the arts, such as, Pablo Picasso, the Cubist movement. Modernism was critical of middle class and the accepted morality of the middle class. What drove the modernists was the concern for the aesthetic or the beautiful. Modernists tried to break the received forms and to create new forms. Modernists believed that each of the arts should influence the other arts. Their paintings were often named after musical pieces, and musical pieces were often named after paintings. For example, McNeill Whistler wrote Nocturnes, and I have no idea what that is. Igor Stravinsky wrote his Rite of Spring ballet, which was based on a musical piece. Look at that. Who is that? Pablo Picasso, Cubism. Involved looking at art from an object from several angles at once. Yes. Cubism. Well, it's here. Yes, this is Cubism. The three musicians. It's like looking at all of the angles of the characters and just flattening them out. Yes, interesting. Back, right there. Sculpture was called the New Sculpture, which mixed various materials and richly sensuous statues. Among the chief proponents of modernism in England were called the Bloomsbury Group, which included the following. Virginia Woolf, who wrote the book A Room of One's Own, which challenged some of the accepted notions of feminist thought. In A Room of One's Own, basically, it said that women needed a place where they could get away from the influence of man. In other words, a room to themselves, where they could be independent, before they could grow. Miss Dalloway, Into the Lighthouse, also by Virginia Woolf, portrayed individuals seeking to make their way in the world with most of the 19th century social and moral certainties removed. Yeah. That's self-explanatory. Doing away with the old conventions of the 19th century Victorian age sentiments, which were basically big cover-ups. Writers like Leonard Woolf, Vanessa Bell, Duncan Grant, Leighton Strachey. I got tired of writing about these people. Marcel Proust, his 7-volume work, In Search of Time Past, used a stream of consciousness format. If you ever want to blow up your mind, and I don't recommend it. Stream of consciousness writing is where the author just begins writing. Oftentimes without punctuation, oftentimes without paragraphs, kind of like some of the DBQs I've seen. And it's just basically what they're thinking, For me, if I'm going to read something, I want to read it to enjoy it. And so I don't particularly like stream of consciousness format. The German Thomas Mann, who wrote Buddenbrooks and the Magic Mountain. Underline, italicize, because it's a book. Buddenbrooks and the Magic Mountain explored both the social experiences of middle-class Germans and how they dealt with the immediate intellectual heritage of the 19th century. James Joyce, who was an Irish writer, wrote Ulysses, wholly transformed not only the novel but the structure of the paragraph. He had a hard time getting published because in the latter part of the 19th century, he writes very frankly about homosexuality, which, yeah, latter part of the 19th century, yeah, that wasn't done. Modernism in literature arose before that's terrible. And it flourished after the war as it was nourished by the social dislocation it created. It being World War One. You all do know, please tell me you do know, that World War One was not called World War One until World War Two. That before that it was simply called the Great War. Economist John Maynard Keynes was the leading. He replaced Adam Smith, and classical economist, on writing about international currencies, international economics. Yeah, and his works are still pretty well received. These authors challenged what they regarded as their inherited values of their Victorian forebears. They all rejected what they regarded as repressive sexual morality of their parents' generation. Mr. Arlinghouse, I have to apologize for such dry subject matter today. I hope you will all forgive me, but this is part of it. This is part and parcel of AP Euro, knowing these things. Uh, Most likely, you would call on them when you are writing an LAQ or an SAQ or the aforementioned DBQ. And so we'll begin with Roman numeral 19 tomorrow, shall we? How about that? It's good talking to you, Mr. Arlinghouse.